Chapter 5. The Great Freezing Fog of Unknowing. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth and Samuel, Samuel, Kings, 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 Kings. What came after Kings? Kilhaw was barely there. It was just a chalk drawing of a village, wiped over with a blackboard duster, leaving nothing but a ghostly grey-white trace. Joseph's steamed-up spectacle lens didn't help. The cold, rasping fog immediately got to work, mind that chest of yours, and his eyelashes went through an endless cycle of frosting and thawing, sending wee ice-melt tears running down his cheeks. He wrapped his scarf tight around his nose and mouth, pulled his hood over his balaclava, went into a mild claustrophobic panic and pulled it all off again. He hated wearing all those bulky knitted layers, that suffocating feeling of being inside when he was outside. In many ways, this was perfect weather for Joseph the Wanderer. In this fog he might happily wander through the village, his world, invisible to everyone, even to God. Sorry. Joseph Kirkland, of all people, could never be invisible, of course. Not in Kilhaw. Folk would recognise him immediately by his patched-up specs or by his gait, stiff and awkward as a tin man. Hey Specky, hey Clarence across eye line, hey Four Eyes, hey Cyclops, hey Frankenstein, hey Tin Man, hey Holy Joe, hey Weirdo. Forget to take the coat hanger out your duffel coat, or by all the other things that singled him out as a person of interest. That Kirkland boy, Elspeth Kirkland's boy, Holy Joe, one of that gospel lot, the Jesus freak, yon's a strange boy and no mistake. Whenever Joseph walked into Rattray's the newsagent, Hoskins the baker's, Underwood's or anywhere else, conversations stuttered to a halt, replaced by raised eyebrows, nods and fragments of murmured gossip. Trouble at home, poor wee soul, shush, don't tell me you don't know, oh wait till I tell you, well now. He began again. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers, his lips rubbing against the inside of his balaclava, damp now with hot breath. Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth and Samuel, Samuel. The whispered words rang unexpectedly loud within the confines of his head. Kings, 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 kings. From the direction of Agonew's paper mill came the sound of dirty laughter and language. Joseph couldn't see the men, so they couldn't see him, but still he slunk deep into the fog, close to the wall, like the bearded man in the lane, just in case. Archie Truman's dad was the loudest among them. It's a fucking joke, so it is. Pair of shite bags, the both of them. Kirkland's the worst. Yes, Mr. Agnew. No, Mr. Agnew. 3 fucking bags full, Mr. Agnew. Mr. fucking Agnew. Mr. fucking Agony. More like, hey, keep it down, Jimmy. Creeping fucking Jesus, so he is. Fucking God Squad, thick as fucking thieves as well. You can't get a fucking look in. The fucking mafia, so they are. Holier than fucking thou as well. Taking time off for their fucking early morning prayers, but one of us saunters in 1 minute late and it's there's your jotters, boys. I'm away inside, this fog's fucking killing me. I've knocked off hundreds of reams of his fucking Bible paper. What'd you use it for, Truman? Roll-ups? Wiping your fat arse? Too fucking right. Laughter. The Monday Memorial Bridge vibrated, but just a little, so he stamped down harder. Usually you could hear its steel cables twang and the rush of the Lille running below. He leaned over the railing. Nothing. And when he got to the middle, he couldn't see either end of this bridge in the clouds. This fog had soaked up everything, sound, smell, everything. He was hot now and his eczema was itching again. He pulled off his mitts, rolled down his socks, and held a wrist, then an ankle, against the frosted metal railing. It made his eyes roll. It was so good. Sore too, but a good sore. Kings, 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 kings. He checked his Bible. Chronicles, Chronicles, of course. 2 Kings, 2 Samuels, 2 Chronicles, then Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. He kept getting them in the wrong order and was going over and over them. Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah. No, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah. No, Esther, Ezra. When a great shaggy black flurry of excited dog came bounding out the grey and knocked the Bible out his hand. Right away it was up on its hind legs, paws on Joseph's chest, its big spam tongue hanging out, panting, breathing its hot, meaty dog breath in Joseph's face. And the next thing it was looking down at the Bible with those bright amber eyes, wagging its tail like mad, looking at the Bible, then at Joseph, then the Bible, saying, "Come on, pick it up and throw it." And then sensing that this particular game of fetch was never going to happen, it ran round Joseph twice and disappeared back into the fog, only to reappear a second later with a big sinewy bone hanging from its jaws, which had dropped in a pool of slabbers right on top of the Bible. Joseph picked it up and wiped the slabbers on his duffel coat, and now the dog was dancing, thinking the game is on again, and had got crouched ready for a throw of the bone or the Bible. Joseph wasn't scared, not at all. He liked dogs. They took to him. He had a way with them. Sometimes he'd lure a dog from out of some big up-the-hill garden with meat scraps or biscuits. He tried to get the dog to stay close, to be devoted to him. And some of them would for a while. They'd do sit, paw, fetch, roll over even, let him rub their ears, go for a walk with them. But then they'd wander off home or their owners would come looking for them. Or guilt would get the better of him and Joseph would take them back himself. Their owners would be in tears sometimes. They were that relieved, that grateful. They even gave Joseph money, a reward for finding their beloved dog. And the dog would go daft at seeing its beloved master and mistress. So everyone was happy. Everyone got something good. But this dog was too rough and raw, too wild in the eye for an up-the-hill dog, which were mostly well-groomed, posh pedigree thises and that's. And there was no collar on it. Even the big dogs and mongrels down the hill had collars and were pampered in their own way. Not this dog. It just sat there looking at him expectantly. Joseph rubbed its head, under its chin, its chest, its velvety ears. The dog nuzzled into him. It was taking comfort from this. So was Joseph. It nudged the bone with its nose. Let's play. How could he deny the dog? When he picked up the slabbery bone, the dog almost turned somersaults. It was that excited. Joseph was as far away now from Nehemiah, Ezra and Esther, or whatever it was, as you could get. But it wasn't safe to throw a big bone in this fog. Folk might appear from any direction and you wouldn't know. So he dropped the bone and kicked it just a wee bit beyond the edge of the mist. But before the dog even had a chance to go after it, the bone came skiting right back. And before Joseph had time to think how odd this was, a big bearded face appeared. Not a peely-wally village lard-fed face, or a cadaverous House of Jack Sprat Kilhaw Gospel Hall face, but a deep-lined, weather-browned face, as leathery as Grandpa's tobacco pouch, with hair as black as the black dog's, as black as Joseph's hair, and dark brown eyes as dark as Joseph's eyes. It wasn't a frightening face, unreadable maybe, definitely, but not frightening. Joseph let out a squeal all the same, and it was just the surprise, and breathed in sharply through his nose. The man smelled strongly of worldly, earthy things and petrol. And then as suddenly as they appeared, the black-bearded man and the black dog were gone. It was the man from the lane, and that was his dog. So he hadn't dreamt it. That was good to know, because sometimes who came up with the cover design, and whose idea was it to have map in the inside cover? Good, right, so I can talk about someone else's role in this book. It's a beautiful cover, I think. And the cover was designed by Mark Meekan. Somewhere down the line, I think I ended up talking about Joan Eardley, the artist, and how I had been looking at some of her paintings of Glasgow street children, particularly when I was trying to get an idea of Archie and wee Maggie, and Joseph to an extent, but certainly Archie and wee Maggie could have stepped out of a Joan Eardley picture. So then somewhere down the line, he got an idea that he wanted to try and do a portrait of the central character, Joseph Kirkland. And I was a little bit nervous, I have to say, because I've been living with this character inside my head. I had a vague picture of what he looked like, quite a clear picture of what he looked like. But I thought, you know, he's a great designer and you have to trust people to do their job. So he went away and he created a series of portraits in pastels. And we eventually came up with this one. We chose this one, and I'm really, really delighted with it. It looks like he's quite appropriately enough, actually, if you've read the book or if you're going to read the book. He looks like he's looking into a fire, and the flames are reflected on his face. Next, whose idea was it to have a map in the inside cover? Now, first of all, the map was also created by Mark Meekan. I love books with maps in them, be it Winnie the Pooh or The Moomins or Treasure Island or Robinson Crusoe, I think, has got a map in it. And also a map features quite highly in this book. Joseph's primary 7 teacher, Miss O'Donnell, asks the class to draw a map. She's just been doing a lesson on a very famous, I think it's a medieval map, now called the Hereford Mappamundi, one of the earliest maps of the world. In that map, the centre of the world, because people hadn't, particularly in the Western world, people hadn't travelled that much. So for the Western Christian world, the centre of the world, the centre of the universe was Jerusalem. The spiritual centre of the world. So she's been talking to the class about this, and she asks them to paint or draw their own maps, and on the map to put in the things that they found important and what would be the centre of their world. So Joseph does this, and of course the centre of his world isn't Jerusalem, but it's very similar. It's the hall, the gospel hall. On the map are all the other probably important geographical locations that appear in the book. The book has got quite a tight geographical frame. It all takes place within this village during this period of time where a very heavy fog has descended on the village. So all around here you'll see the fog, which is very similar to what you'll find in the Hereford Mappamundi and a lot of other ancient maps. This is also, could be regarded, if you like, as the dangerous uncharted territories, so that you'll find mermaids, dragons, beasts, all kinds of creatures. You'll have heaven up above and hell down below. And Joseph has added, again, I won't talk too much about this, but he has added his own archways, red archways, which are his gateways to hell. And these are the places that he has been told not to go to, because if he does, they will take him further away from God. Okay? And there are the other geographical points of interest that appear in the book. The river, the Lille. There's a lake down here where Caleb lives, the traveller, stroke tinker. That's called the Sappy. And then we've got the main street here with its shops and forests and hills and whatnot. The map appears a fair bit in the book. But I don't describe it in absolute detail. So when it was agreed that Mark would create a map, he went back to my book and then he came up with this, and I almost wept with delight when I saw it, because it's exactly as I imagined it. And I thought, how did he do that? How did he see inside my head and produce this? So I love it. I love this. I have a novel and it's got a map in it. I'm happy. So that's the story of the map and the cover. They headed down to the meadows to cremate the dead bird that was waiting for them on the makeshift altar. Archie knew all about cremations. 2 granders and a gran. It's dead creepy, so it is. They pull a red curtain round the coffin, then there's music like in a Hammer horror film. And when the curtain opens again, it's gone like one of David Nixon's magic tricks. No, what actually happens, but the coffin just goes down into the cellar, then the workies get it and rip off all the fancy bits like the brass handles, or even the actual coffin if it's expensive wood, and flog it down Paddy's Market or somewhere. Honest. And then they shove the body in a furnace and one of them presses this big red button and push, 100 flamethrowers shoot out the side, and that's you, burnt to a cinder in 5 seconds flat. Can you imagine it? Joseph Kirkland had no problems imagining it. The offering of leaves, moss, twigs, millet spray and budgie seed were all still there, plus 1 tiny yellow downy feather. But the blue tit was gone. Maybe it was only playing dead, said Archie. They do that sometimes. They both looked up at the sky, but there was still no sky, or everything was sky. Archie yawned and shivered and tapped Joseph on the shoulder, pulling him back from the edge of the dwam he was on the brink of falling into. We could have a wee nip to keep us warm, he said, a cheeky glint in his eye, and lifted the big bottle to his lips. Maybe we should, eh? Have you ever tried it? It's dead burny. I saw your dad. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. At Faulkner's, Archie kicked a stone. Bet he was stocious, he said. He tried to feign indifference, but he wasn't indifferent, not at all. Was he? Joseph shrugged, and Archie set about thrashing every thorny bush within reach of his stick, kicking every stone that lay in his way, then quite matter of fact, think I'll end up like him? There being no more stones, he began kicking the ground. My gran says my dad's like that because my granddad was like that, but all my family are like that. They all like a drink. Even my gran likes a drink. He tried to snap off a branch. You'll end up like your dad, she says, whenever I get up to something. The stick was green, but he twisted it until sinew by sinew it broke. Wee Maggie won't be like that, but she's too smart, so she is. Bet she ends up marrying a prince or a film star or something, or somebody from up the hill, and maybe even... He knew Joseph was shy, so he didn't say it. Bet she does as well. He threw the vodka bottle from hand to hand, up into the air, swinging it around like an Indian club, then stopped and presented it to Joseph. Want to burn something? On a tree at the end of the meadows, nearest the schemes, was one of Archie's rope swings. It wasn't his best effort, but it was made with thick, heavy rope with a big seat knot instead of a stick. Archie climbed up, untied it, and got himself into a nice comfy place on the fork of a high branch where he could watch his friend go about his business. Joseph poured the vodka a wee bit at a time into the knot, letting it soak in. The whole process took a while, and when the knot was completely sodden, he held a match to it. Archie began an ululating war cry as Joseph started swinging the burning knot around his head. Slowly at first, letting out more and more rope, then faster and faster, till all Archie could see was a great circle of fire, and Joseph Kirkland in the centre of it, his one eye flaming bright behind his spectacle lens. It was a rare treat for Archie to see Joseph Kirkland like this, in his fiery element, truly glorious. "Faster!" shouted Archie, nearly falling out the tree with excitement. Joseph leant back and put his whole body into it. The momentum helped him maintain his balance, and the faster he went, the slower everything else became. There was no dizziness. He was part of this now. In frosted bushes and low-hanging branches, wee hidden creatures flapped and scurried away. "Do your books of the Bible, Joseph." Was that Archie shouting? "Do your books of the Bible." So he did. Chanting like a playground skipping game, chanting to the beat of the burning rope, ecstatic, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth and Samuel, Samuel, Kings, Kings, Chronicles, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. The book has taken several forms. It's been a bit of a journey. I first had the idea to write Blessed Assurance probably 14 years ago, and then it was going to take the form of a musical, actually, probably similar to Oh, What a Lovely War, or maybe some of the work by Dennis Potter, who has been a big influence, I suppose. I haven't really thought about that, but actually the whole world of Dennis Potter, particularly his early work, which is steeped in kind of rural communities and religion. So I was going to write this musical, similar story, very, very stripped down, about a little boy growing up in a religious community. He tells a big lie, and I was going to tell it through song, but use the existing hymn tunes and then add lyrics, different lyrics, like "Oh, What a Lovely War." But I didn't. I didn't get very far with it, to be honest. Then I did an MA in television fiction writing at Caledonia University, and for one of my tasks I had to write a single drama, a 1-hour drama, which in my case ended up being one of those kind of play for today style dramas. If anyone remembers, is old enough to remember Play for Today. And again, I went back to this story, and again it was called Blessed Assurance, and this time it was a much more fleshed out story, quite visual, not a lot of dialogue. So when I started writing the actual novel, I had an idea of the world, but a lot of the characters appeared as I was writing it. Characters that did not appear in the script at all. In fact, one of the main things that happened that really got me going with it was when I introduced two of the other child characters, wee Maggie and Archie, particularly Archie in a way. To begin with, Joseph Kirkland, the main character, was on this journey on his own. Certainly in the script form, he was very much on his own. But when I started writing it as a novel, it felt desperately lonely and sad and bleak. And I thought, oh my God, I can't write this. This is too much. I have to write him a friend. So I introduced this character of Archie Truman, and his little sister, wee Maggie. And that really opened things up for me. It allowed me to go places geographically, places in terms of a physical journey, and places more in terms of character and exploring Joseph's psyche. And also, as soon as I introduced Archie to Joseph Kirkland, I immediately was in the territory of that other classic childhood double act, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Although I wasn't necessarily thinking about that when I was writing it, but I can see that now. There is an element of that. Well, the arithmetic, for a start, the length of a novel. The main thing, I suppose, is that writing a play or being involved in any part of the theatre process is very collaborative. So even after you've finished a script, that's just the beginning of the next part of the creative process that involves actors, directors, designers, composers, all sorts of people who bring that piece to fruition. And even then, the next part of the creative process is the performing it in front of an audience, and the audience become part of that experience, part of that shared experience. So that's very different. It's still storytelling at its heart. You're still wanting to tell a story. The relationship between a book and a reader is different. It's more intimate, I suppose. It's inside your head. I suppose that's why some writers like doing live events, readings and libraries and book clubs and book festivals and whatnot, and things like this. Because it does give you that opportunity to make a real human-to-human connection, have a shared experience, which again is one of the joys of theatre. And this is a similar question. There are lots of different characters with different voices in the book. Was it useful having experience of being an actor? Because I work as an actor as well. Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, certainly when it comes to reading back dialogue, although having said that, dialogue in a book is very different from dialogue in a play, and you know, if you cut out the dialogue from this book, there are long passages of dialogue, and then perform them, they may, I don't know how they would work, but they might well be quite clunky. The theatre that I was involved in as a performer, I was part of a theatre company called Bench Tours, and certainly in the early days a lot of our work was created through improvisation, and a lot of my training as an actor involved a lot of improvisation. And I used to really enjoy getting up on a rehearsal room floor on my own or with another performer and improvising, creating text, creating scenes, ideas. And there's an element of that when you're writing fiction and when you're writing a play, that you're improvising inside your own head. This section is towards the end of the chapter, when they are actually playing hide and seek in the fog. Hide and seek in this weather was fantastic and impossible. A few steps in any direction and you were invisible. Watch out for those crocodiles in the sappy, said Archie. There aren't any crocodiles in the sappy, she squealed and looked around like there might just be crocodiles in the sappy. Archie might be a daredevil with his own life, but not with his wee sisters. She wasn't allowed to hide on her own, and when it was her turn to seek, Joseph or Archie went with her. For Archie, and to a lesser extent Joseph, some sense of geography remained even with everything obscured by the fog. They knew the nooks and crannies, rocks and boulders, bushes and trees, where they'd built swings or played commandos and cowboys and Indians, where they'd ambled endlessly and aimlessly together and alone. Wee Maggie had only ever been led, but after a few rounds her confidence grew. Can I have a go on my own? All right, but just a wee go. Me and Joseph will hide nearby. OK, but no cheating, Archie, and mind shout inden 1, 2, 3 or it doesn't count. Make sure he doesn't cheat, Joseph, he always cheats. She's a hide-and-seek police, so she is. She put her hands over her eyes and counted loud and slow. 1, 2, 3. By 5, Joseph could barely hear her. By 8, he was hiding behind a bush and couldn't be sure if she'd said her, "Here I come, ready or not." He waited just a second or two, but enough to wonder why Auntie Abby had told him not to go to the sappy, and what was all that whispering between her and Mr. Webster. Grown-ups were like that. When something bad was in the air, they never just said, right, here's the thing. No. It was all, don't talk to this person or that person. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't go here or there. And never a because. You never knew. And you couldn't ask. Her scream was dampened by the fog. But even so, it was one of those short, open throat screams of a child who has just woken itself up from a nightmare, only to discover it hadn't woken up at all. Joseph could feel the place in his own body where that scream came from. He'd screamed that scream often enough. Oh, please, please not wee Maggie. Please don't make her a sign. Pictures of wee Maggie were forming now, pictures that he did not want to see, built from half-heard news stories, warnings from grown-ups, apocryphal tales, the Bible and things overheard. You never knew when someone great or small would be taken. Kilhaw was filled with the broken bones of children, with blindings, cracked skulls, severed fingers, spilt blood, and with tragic fatalities. A stumble or a trip might lead to a collision with a vehicle or a fall from a precipice. You never knew when it would. He tried to shake these thoughts from his head, and when they still wouldn't shift, he prayed his usual prayer, but really prayed it, out loud, like Gran prayed, for the highest stakes. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon this little child, pity my simplicity. There was Archie now. Vague and wraith-like Archie, who every day promised wee Maggie in word or deed, I'll always be there for you. Whose only ambition was to stand between his wee sister and jeopardy. Whose own recklessness was in fact a lure, designed to attract all danger away from her and towards himself. Hey, Mr. Menace, hey, Dr. Danger, don't look at her, look at me. He was flailing around in the fog, not playing hide and seek now, but a frenzied game of blind man's buff. He had fresh scratches and grazes on his face, hands and knees, and a new rip on his anorak from charging through thorny bushes, low-hanging branches, and tripping over roots and stones and anything else that got in his way. And he was shouting high and sharp, trying to cut through the fog, Maggie, 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 reaching an almost hysterical pitch now, Maggie, Maggie, while at the same time, for wee Maggie's sake, desperately trying to sound calm and normal. Maggie, Maggie. A big hand grabbed Joseph by the wrist and pulled him towards the water's edge. There was that earthy smell again, that tree sap, nettle, damp dog, tweed and petrol. Then warm fur pushing against his bare legs. It was him, them. Joseph didn't resist. The hand let go, and there was a petrified wee Maggie, sitting stock still on a boulder right at the very edge of the ice-fringed sappy, her face in her hands, crying, not for her mum and dad, but for Archie. Seconds later, Archie was there, holding his wee sister close. The little colour he had drained out of him. But even so, it was important that he made a joke of it all. I better get back, he said, sniffing and shaking, and shout in den 1, 2, 3. Caught you, she said, grabbing him tight. I win. And she laughed and sniffed and shook and sobbed and laughed and sobbed again as she told, as best she could, what had happened. Oh, Archie, I was right beside the water and I tripped up and I thought I was going to fall in, but somebody grabbed me and he had this deep voice and he said, you'll sit there and you will not move, just like that. But I couldn't see him and I thought it was you, Archie, doing a funny voice, but it wasn't anything like one of your funny voices. And once more, she began her shaking and sobbing. Archie lifted her up. She wrapped her arms and legs around him. Of course it was me, you daft wee monkey. I was doing my Tarzan voice. Listen, Maggie must sit, not move. She did not believe, but wanted to believe, and so she made herself believe. I just got a fright, she said, wiping her nose on his anorak. Thanks very much. That was just clean on as well. She laughed, and wiped her nose on him again and again. They walked in silence, wee Maggie quiet in Archie's arms. Archie's legs looked like they might buckle, but he didn't put her down till they got back to their house. Joseph wanted to tell him about the man and the dog and all, reassure them that he was certain this man was good, that he was not any kind of bogeyman. I will, just not now. Wee Maggie was safe. That was enough to be getting on with. It was a good sign. Thank you. No, I wasn't. So I wasn't writing the book full time for 9 to 5 for those years. I would say that there weren't many days went by without me picking it up and doing something. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the most useful things I was doing while I was writing this is teaching creative writing in a prison for probably the whole duration that I was writing this book, actually. Anyway, that was extraordinarily useful, really, really helpful to me. I hope it was useful to the guys in the creative writing class. In the acknowledgements, I do name my creative writing class in the prison for listening to some early pages and asking challenging questions. I also thank the NHS, by the way, because I had an illness during this and I very possibly wouldn't have finished the book at all if it hadn't been for the NHS. But yeah, working in a prison was fantastic because all the questions that were coming up that the guys were asking about their own writing or about the process of writing were exactly the same questions that I was asking myself about my writing. So it was really useful. So my thanking the prison creative writing class wasn't some kind of patronising sop. It was it's genuine. Somebody was asking me any advice on writing a novel, and some people will tell you to show your work to as many people as possible and get lots of feedback. And I would say, yes, but do be careful and be very specific about the kind of feedback that you want. Because not all feedback, even if we are best friends or other writers, it's not always helpful. I mean, some writers, really good writers, really lovely people, you get an impression that they want you to write the kind of book that they want to write. So their advice might not always be useful. And critiquing is quite a skill. You don't really want someone to say, oh, I don't like that bit. I would change that if I was you. Rather, it's useful if someone asks you questions, or maybe there's something that they found confusing. And there's a difference between finding something confusing and finding something ambiguous or intriguing. I am not a very good person for showing my work to other people. I didn't show that to anyone until I had completely finished it. It was towards its final draft, when I read a few pages to the prisoners, and then I handed it to the publisher, but my family and friends didn't read any of it. I don't know if that... I'm not advising that, by the way. To be honest, to be fair to myself, I think it was just a lack of confidence. I think I had gone down the line of creating this monster of a piece, and I was terrified that they would think it was crap. Rather than not having any faith in them or trust in their advice, I think it was just my own lack of confidence. So I think probably my next book, I'll be more likely to read passages out, to let friends read it and see what they think. Well, I have been writing more and more in Scots over the years. It still, to a certain extent, feels like an act of translation for me sometimes. So the language that Benjamin Much uses, Benjamin Much is a preacher. He's an itinerant preacher, by the way. He was in prison in the northeast, but we don't quite know where he's from. So his language, the Scots language that he uses, is not specific to the northeast. And I was quite careful about that, about not honing his mother tongue down to one particular geographical area. Over the years, I've written plays. As a performer and as an actor, I was in and then latterly wrote 2 or 3 plays about Robert Burns, very kind of left field contemporary plays about Robert Burns. But that meant writing in a kind of Burnsian Ayrshire Scots and introducing contemporary Scots as well. Yeah, it took a bit of time writing that section. It's a couple of friends I've read it, one from Poland and one from in London, who found the passage with Benjamin Much quite too much or quite tricky. And my only advice to you when you come across that section where Benjamin Much gives his testimony is to maybe read it out loud. Chapter 14, The Testimony of Benjamin Much. And I'm going to skip a couple of pages and start at the moment Benjamin Much appears. And there's been quite a build-up to Benjamin Much. Joseph is banking on Benjamin Much, this itinerant preacher, to save him, to really give him the courage to be truly saved. Well, the sun has suddenly come out and the light has changed. Very appropriate for Benjamin Much's arrival. Benjamin Much walked straight out of the Old Testament. From the moment he appeared and began his slow ascent onto the platform, Joseph Kirkland was bewitched. He was all that Joseph had imagined, all he'd hoped for, more, much more. He was Abraham, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all of them, all the prophets. He was even carrying a shepherd's crook, for goodness sake, the kind they'd have used in the parable of the lost sheep, the kind Moses might have used to part the Red Sea. If anyone was to be the saving of Joseph Kirkland, it must surely be this man. Joseph felt the cold lead dread subside a little, enough, and sighed the sigh of a drowning man who'd just seen a ship on the horizon. SOS indeed. Oh, this hollow-cheeked old man was just perfect. He was as tall, thin and craggy as a sea stack, with a long beard and a wild mane of hair as white as foam on a breaking wave. He was magnificent, magnetic. He wore the uniform of the Northeast evangelist, tweed suit, Fair Isle v-neck jumper, grey flannel shirt, green knitted tie, brown brogues. All of it, all of him had seen better days. But it was in his milky opal eyes, filmed with cataract clouds, that his splendid decrepitude was most apparent. His life of long walks and saving souls had clearly taken its toll. He stopped directly on top of the trapdoor and raised himself up to his full considerable height. I've been stravaiging up and down the Kintra, frae Muckle Rose to Melrose and back again, and noo here I am in Kilhaw in Smear. Joseph had cousins in the northeast, but Benjamin Much didn't sound like any of them, like anyone Joseph had ever met. And neither was this the boom or bellow of those itinerant fire and brimstone preachers Joseph had witnessed at the Templeton Hall. This was a high, hoarse whisper that everyone heard because everyone wanted to hear. Benjamin Much looked around and quietly chuckled. Chuckling? In the hall? I've no been here for lang and weary. I wonder why the good Lord in his wisdom has led me here. For me. You've come for me. Well now, I've some muckle good news, and I've some muckle bad news, as they say. I'll gaze a the bad news first, eh? It has been written that the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the whoremongers and warlocks and idolaters and all the liars shall hae their part in the loch which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Benjamin Much considered this. Let it sink in for his own benefit as much as anyone else's. The heat in the hall played its part. This is the way it is. This is the way it will be. But there is good news. He chuckled again and shook his big bearded lion-maned head as though not quite believing it himself. And it's gae good. Gae good. The good news is that God so loved the world that he gied his only begotten Son. His ain Son. Think about that now, eh? That whosoever believeth in him shouldn't perish, but hae everlasting life. Joseph was shocked. Not at the descriptions of damnation and salvation, which he'd heard often enough, but at Benjamin Much quoting scripture in Scottish words. Nobody used Scottish words in the hall, not like this, and certainly not when quoting scripture. So this is another section from chapter 14, the testimony of Benjamin Much, and this is towards the end of Benjamin's testimony. Benjamin Much answered questions about life as a missionary, about his eternal wanderings from village to village, town to town, labouring for the Lord. Most of them had read Heroes of the Cross, and Benjamin Much sensed their disappointment when it became clear that his missionary work had not taken him far beyond the Scottish borders. I suppose yous are asking yourselves, what for did you no gang over to Dorcas Africa, or Dorcas India, or Dorcas Papua New Guinea, or Dorcas some other place over the sea, eh? Places where they'll eat yous as soon as look at yous. Places where the real heathens live, eh? Well, I'll tell yous. He rose to his feet again. His evangelical armoury was extensive. He could do avuncular warmth and wit, child-friendly HAPPY, but he had the Old Testament big guns too. Because in the een o' the Lord, yin's unsaved soul is like ony other. Because Dorcas Africa is nae dorker than Dorcas Glasgow or Dorcas Aberdeen, nae dorker than Dorcas Barra or Dorcas South Uist, nae dorker even than Dorcas Kilhaw. Everywhere has a dark interior. He swept the hall with his shepherd's crook, and these ken where's the darkest interior o' all. He punched his heart. In here, and tapped his skull, and in here. This is where you'll find the deal in all his works. This is where you'll find murdering drunkards like me. He was stabbing at the air now. This is where you'll find poor lost souls, like Joseph. His shepherd's crook was pointing directly at Joseph Kirkland. From the great ocean of notions, the sea of stories, as Salman Rushdie would say in his wonderful fable, Haroun and the Sea of Stories. Some of the stories come from different sources. So, for example, Archie first appeared in a short story called Everyone Wants to Be Best Friends with Harry, about this little boy who's part of a group of friends in a village, and he does all these very naughty things, gets into trouble, breaks into shops, sets fire to things, all sorts of things. And he always takes the blame, as Archie does, so that the other boys, his friends, don't get into trouble. Yet the parents of those other friends will also say, oh, make sure you don't play with that Harry, he's a bad one, he's from the wrong side of the tracks. There's something about the bravery and morality and sense of friendship and camaraderie that Harry had, that Archie has, that I find very appealing. And also Archie's character throws into relief Joseph's character and makes him question himself and what he believes is right and wrong, and what is friendship, and etc. And other things that I really don't know, just the magic or alchemy of storytelling. You know, you go on a journey, you trust your character, you follow their story and see where they're going to take you, and you end up meeting all sorts of people and going to all sorts of interesting places that you didn't envisage. And in the end, you look back and think, where did that come from? But once you have the world, and once you have the main idea, and you have a character, and it feels real, and you can really hear his voice, then things kind of, for me anyway, they sort of took care of themselves. That sounds easy, that then after I had it all down, there was a huge amount of paring away and rearranging and honing and fine-tuning, and it took forever. It went through several drafts. The most enjoyable part came later, I have to say. It was hard work knocking out that first draft, which was really big and baggy and messy. But once I had that, then I could start chipping away at it. And to begin with, I didn't really know what I had. I didn't have a voice. There were lots of different voices. I didn't recognise any continuity in terms of style or voice in it. But I did have a story. And I have to say, when I first started writing that big baggy first draft, I was writing it only for me. I wasn't even thinking about anyone else reading it, or caring about anyone else reading it, or taking the reader into consideration. Wasn't thinking about any of that. But then as I started honing away, and that I'm talking about, you know, a period of years, then I started to find myself some kind of storytelling voice that I didn't know if it worked because it hadn't been published and nobody had read it. But it was certainly a voice that I was comfortable writing in, and it made sense to me, and it seemed to work for me. It allowed me to carry on working on it and honing it down, and it felt right. Yeah, although I didn't know if it was right, but it felt right. But later on, probably in the last couple of drafts, I was thinking about the reader. I was thinking, that makes sense to me, and will it make sense to the reader, or is that a little bit awkward in a way that's not useful? But in terms of editing for the sense of it, there were some questions. Essentially, what the editor wants isn't to publish a book that looks like all his other books. He wants to make my book the best version of itself that it can be, and to help me produce the best version of my book that I can. And hopefully, I could have tinkered with it forever. I mean, I would have been quite happy, to be honest, to continually tell people I have a book coming out soon, and it never coming out, and just keep on tinkering with it. But it's there, and it is what it is, and I hope that it brings people some pleasure. Okay.